you so much. It's a pleasure to be, in this conversation. I'm Sonia. At the heart of it, a simple country girl who came to Kingston for university. And in my movement from Montego Bay, where I grew up, to Kingston for university, I was studying geography and geology at my undergraduate days. I really got in touch with how much I did not know about Jamaican culture. And so my entry point into anything that is even historical comes from my grounding in geography, but also my grounding in culture. So I ended up doing a PhD in cultural studies at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. And my initial focus was going to be on a comparison between the dance of the dance hall, the dance of Kumina, and many listeners may not know what Kumina is, but I invite them to Google. Google is your best friend, hey? Uh, Kumina and revival. And then I said, that may be too much. Let me focus on the dance of the dance hall. And I ended up looking so much into the history of performance practice from the plantation days, in fact, the slave ship. My book, Dance Hall from Slave Ship to Ghetto, really captures the essence of that conversation, that trajectory of performance practice, that trajectory also of suppression, the ways in which no space was made for entertainment for those who lived and had their being in this part of the world, forcibly transported in terms of the transatlantic slave trade to this part of the world. And I became very interested in history, even though I had failed history at the A level, studies. I became so much invested in history because I had to then teach myself the history I needed to know in order to grapple with what I was seeing in a contemporary moment around Jamaican popular culture, Jamaican popular dance, music, and so on. So that's a little bit about me. I've spent mostly all of my academic career in the University of the West Indies, where I have invested time teaching, researching, publishing, and also contributing to the administrative sort of evolution of the university. In my role, most recently as deputy dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, and currently the director of the Center for Reparation Research, which I really cherish in terms of an opportunity to contribute to that agenda regionally and internationally. So I assumed the role of director of the CRR in August 2024, and in a sense it was serendipitous. I'm sure there are those who might say, this was a role that was perhaps made for you, and you're fitting for this role. And I've got some really good feedback, some good encouragement, good vibes from people who have, really said to themselves and to me, you're really right for this role. And I'm going to be coming to those persons. I'm going to be reaching out to all of them to support the work that we will do. And strategically, I see that work as, obviously following in the footsteps of those persons who have spent their lives. And I go all the way back to the Rastafari from the 1930s, and before them, Marcus Garvey, who invested time and effort, a lot of personal sacrifice, all the way to Bob Marley through his message music and the reggae musicians who have kept repatriation and even, reparations alive. And I want to really single out the Rastafari movement, because in the way that Barry Evans talks about the Rastafari as the memory of the Jamaican people, they have not only been the memory of the Jamaican people, but the memory of the entire world, bringing attention to so many of the issues that confront us, whether it's, peace, unity, whether it is racism. There are so many things that the Rastas have held in front of our eyes so that we can be accountable in this time. So I really see the work that I must do in this new iteration of the reparations movement in the Caribbean in particular. Because, of course, the Center for Reparation Research is the arm of the university that supports the research agenda for reparation in the CARICOM Reparations Commission. I really see the work that I must do as one which takes reparation to the streets. And I mean the streets that were being pounded by the Rastafari brethren, by Marcus Garvey and the UNIA participants and followers, by those street preachers in, Bedwardian times. I don't know how many of you may know Alexander Bedward as one who led a liberation, let me say, a liberation theology movement in the Caribbean, in Jamaica in particular, where his, participants in that church were very clear about a focus on Africa. And so there's a trajectory in Jamaica, in the Caribbean region, that has always been interested in repair. And I talk about repair because clearly I've spoken about the way in which my own work has come out of culture. My focus on reparation has come out of a grounding in culture. That repair, in the way that the CARICOM 10-point plan iterates, has to be seen in multiple dimensions of life. And so whether it is celebration, whether it is dance, whether it is music, whether it is health, public health, whether it is, the economics, the structures of government, whatever it is, the spheres of life have to be impacted by this whole concept of repair and reparation in particular. Psychological reparation. We talk about wellness, which is something I'm completely passionate about. That the entire human experience must be accounted for in the ways that we talk about reparation. Wellness in particular, we have never been the people in the region to have a conversation about wellness for ourselves. This is something that disturbs me and ignites me at the same time. That the Caribbean, which serves now as a primary tourism destination for people of the global north, they come here for wellness. But the people who serve them, the people who help them to get into a mindset about wellness, are never the people who have had conversations for themselves about wellness. These are not the people who can go on vacations and have rest and relaxation, to recuperate, to reset their own lives in meaningful ways. And so I am very, 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 very clear that those are the people I want to reach. The Center for Reparation Research must also, in the context of the University of the West Indies, be able to chart a research agenda with stakeholders who have not necessarily seen reparation in their own work, but by virtue of the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary terrain that reparation must cover, their work becomes important in let's say building out a reparatory justice research agenda. And one of the things I'm extremely proud of in the context of the educational agenda is that the University of the West Indies most recently, with the University of Glasgow and through the Glasgow Caribbean Development Center for Development Research, they have now instituted a master's program in reparatory justice. And it's a program in which I teach. I teach a course on psychohistoriography, health, and reparatory justice, which I developed along with other colleagues at the university who were developing courses to build out the offerings from the Caribbean. I'm very proud of the fact that we now have a program. Persons from around the world can also see that reparatory justice is something that you can study. You can ground yourself in this context of justice. I know many would have heard that in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are quite aligned with the reparatory justice agenda, the university recently launched a global school of development justice. And it is a very important highlight of the work we must do from this part of the world, the global south, that serves the people of the street, the ordinary people of the Caribbean, the people who may not know what reparations can mean for them, or even the concept as it is used in the academy, but they must be able to relate at the end of this decade. And I'm hoping that the United Nations, in conjunction with all the stakeholders that have been advocating for a new decade for peoples of African descent, that we do have another decade in which to finalize, to really get a handle on some of these questions for the people who matter. So the strategy, the strategic plan that I've charted so far has very much to do, I think, with three major planks. The Center for Reparation Research is interested in terms of its mandate in three major things: advocacy, uh, education, and research. Those are very basic to our mandate. And so the strategic plan has those same three planks inside of it. But I'm interested in making sure that, for example, in under research, the University of the West Indies colleagues are co-opted very seriously and deliberately into a research agenda for reparations that makes reparatory justice something that can be routinized in the academy, not just in the at the master's level, which I spoke about earlier, but at the undergraduate level. There are no courses at the undergraduate level in reparation in the region. So where education is concerned, there are some things that we must do vitally. And I mean routinize reparation at the undergraduate level, at the university level, but also where we have reparatory justice on the agenda, or let me say in the curriculum, at the CSEC level, as in the Caribbean Secondary Education curriculum level, we must be able to have those students move through the system with an understanding of reparatory justice at various levels in the education system. And I'm going to relate this to the context in which we routinize gender studies, for example. At the university level, there are courses on gender and development, for example, in several disciplines. That's another interdisciplinary agenda. And I'm wanting persons to be able to relate to reparatory justice at that granular level, that it impacts you in whatever sphere, whatever discipline you can imagine. So that's one thing. The education agenda is not just about the secondary level, therefore, but it's also about the tertiary level. And in that regard, one thing to support curriculum development and the teaching of reparation must be in terms of the research materials that are going to be published and disseminated. What are students going to be using in the classroom? And while we have several formidable contributions, I speak now of my predecessor, Vereen Shepherd. I speak of the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Sir Hilary Beckles. These are persons who have written substantially and have contributed. Anna Lucia, there are a number of persons in the international sphere who have books now. But I'm suggesting that in the Caribbean, one way of also doing this repair is self-reflection. And that reflexivity in terms of the process to sit and write in the same way that I went through it. I went through the same thing as I was doing my own cultural studies investigation of Jamaican dancehall, rooting myself inside of a culture that in some ways denigrated in my own country. One process, one part of that repair must also be the ways in which we allow ourselves the reflection to write, to process, to research, and to contribute that to the students who come into the classroom. So the very first thing I have sought to do is to move to collect data from the academics inside of the university who are, one, doing research already on anything related to reparatory justice, and also asking those who may be interested in aligning their work with a reparatory justice agenda. We've asked them some questions, they filled out a template. We are moving to establish a research cluster on reparatory justice in the University of the West Indies. And of course, the university has 5 campuses across at least 26 or so some territory. Well, the UETV, for example, is viewed in 26 territories, and many of the reparatory justice events are being viewed in those contexts. But the university touches a number of territories, even beyond the CARICOM region in particular. So let me first place education, therefore, on the agenda. And that has to do with the research that is a plank of the Center for Reparation Research. The advocacy is another dimension. And in the context of my own work, it must be that we're aligning with stakeholders in a way that reaches the generations to come. And this is where reaching them in the streets that they occupy, the social media streets, for example, that becomes really very important. So the advocacy is going to be also at the level of the United Nations and so on, at the very levels of intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations in the way that we've been doing. But also we have started to somewhat revolutionize the ways in which we use the social media platforms that we've been accustomed to using, and highlighting not just the CARICOM 10-point plan, but we're going to be partnering with institutions established like the Repair campaign to do so much more in reaching every single citizen of the region. And that's my focus, the Caribbean region. And of course, there is a large Caribbean diaspora. So the Caribbean diaspora as well, reaching everyone about reparations. It's also something that I hope will, become important in this campaign, election campaign in the United States of America. There are various reparatory justice issues that have been taken up by, scholars, by institutions. And I'm hoping that in the context of this campaign, there is also going to be a place for reparatory justice to be included. The campaign is, of course, quite advanced. The elections are upon us, but I'm also hoping that beyond the elections, beyond this business, the expedience of a campaign, there's going to be much more focus, especially for those who have been disenfranchised. And I'm including indigenous peoples in that context. It's not just those who have been transported in the context of a transatlantic trade in Africans into chattel slavery. I'm also including those persons who have, in terms of near genocidal proportions, the decimation of communities in the Caribbean and in the Americas more largely, of indigenous or First Nation peoples. I think the CARICOM 10-point plan has really been a fabulous articulation of where we must go in terms of the advocacy around reparation. And I start there because many of the countries to which letters have been sent, the colonizing countries now, the Netherlands, Spain, Britain, and so on, which have not responded to these letters that have been sent to them from the CARICOM Reparations Commission and the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee in particular. They've not responded, and we've not received apologies formally from Britain. Let me zone in on Britain and the Commonwealth in particular, that has been very much bringing the attention to reparatory justice in multiple ways, whether it is the return of artifacts, let me use the word stolen from colonies, former colonies, or it is at the level of economic repair to impact the development that has been stymied in countries in the region. At whichever level, this conversation must occur. And we have seen quite a bit of traction, heirs of slavery, that there's a movement with apologies coming from individuals, institutions, banks, churches, and so on. but not apologies coming so fast from countries. And whether there is a perception about the fact that an economy such as Britain's will become bankrupt, with a conversation about economic repair in relation to the Commonwealth. Certainly, those countries that suffered through chattel slavery, persons made to be inhuman in the context of the treatment, given no land at emancipation, and having nothing to forge their way into what is today independence. We must become accountable to the crimes of against humanity in the context of slavery. We must become accountable to the kind of devastation wreaked against countries and peoples of African descent in particular. And I feel very strongly about this, not in an aesthetic way, not in a philosophical way. I feel strongly about this in a fundamentally human moral way. And this is important because at a human level, if you've wronged someone, you must be able to make right at some point. And so it is very important that we continue the advocacy, we continue the negotiations, we continue the partnerships. And one of the things I feel very strongly about as well is the need for a convergence. When I say convergence, I mean a coalescing around reparations from the disparate institutions and entities that are also working on reparatory justice. There's need for a real strategy, and in some cases a negotiating strategy that reaps the kind of reward we would want in the context of the negotiations, particularly with the colonizing nations. So I will say there is much work to be done. Everyone needs to be having the conversation about reparation, whether it's in their living rooms, in the classroom, in the workplace. It's important that we all educate ourselves and be able to join in that conversation in order that a critical mass of us can begin to really make an impact in that sphere. So I am an action person. I'm into action. I really believe it's important to put your mouth, you put your money where your mouth is. And while the University of the West Indies is grappling with its own sort of access to resources in a broad sort of sense, we must be able to align our goals and align our strategies with those institutions and entities that also have or share those goals. So I see cooperation and collaboration with entities such as the Repair Campaign as quite important. It's important that we find common ground and an alignment with a common strategies to reach people. I am sure that if we were to work together and working together, there's a saying, if you want to go far, you work together. I'm sure if we were to work together, the resources that we would each be spending would be multiplied by virtue of the common effort. And so I'm committed to collaboration in a very real way. I see one major project that I've been discussing already with the Repair Campaign is one that will see us impacting the region and as well Britain itself. Let me use the example of history education in the UK. I think that it is important in the context of repair that those persons in Britain, in the United Kingdom, who are teaching history, who are learning history, so both the teachers and the students, be given an opportunity to learn about the atrocities committed by Britain in the context of the transatlantic slave trade. I understand that this is not a routine part of the education at all. And so I think it's important in the accountability that must be a part of repair. Countries such as Britain make it a part of the agenda to include the things that are not so nice, not so pretty, not so sexy in their own education system, so that students coming up can also see that Britain was not all that great in terms of all that it did. And let me use the opportunity now to say there are Jamaicans, for example. I'm sure there are Barbadians, Trinidadians, um, many of them who will say, you know, the independence movement was a farce. We should really have stayed being colonies of Britain. We would have been better off. There are people who have that opinion. But I can't see how it is we would have been better off. Let me use the example of some of the overseas territories, whether it's Martinique, Guadeloupe, Bermuda. They're having their own economic problems. They're having their own developmental challenges. Nothing in terms of the kind of economic guarantee is there, or developmental guarantee. And I want to say, to those persons who would feel that the independence movement was a farce, that, and therefore, if they think the independence movement was a farce, clearly emancipation was a farce. And there is so much that we have fought for that can't be erased just in terms of an understanding of independence and emancipation in a superficial way. If you're forcibly transported against your will to territories you don't know, to forge a life without any resources made available to you, in a context where you're not even able to speak the language of the colonizer, you are not given any space in the usual way to celebrate, live, and have your being. This is a fundamental sort of atrocity that cannot be explained in any other way, and should not be entertained as a philosophical or any kind of aesthetic conversation. The fundamental rights of humans chartered by the United Nations, those rights include the ability to live and have your being in a dignified way. Nothing about slavery was dignified. And in fact, nothing about emancipation from slavery was dignified. Only dignified for those planters who received compensation at the ending of slavery, but not those who were working their fingers off, their toes off, their hearts off, their minds to supply the mother country, Britain in particular now, because I am Jamaican, with the resources to build a country of formidable proportions. And this is the real crisis, that when you look at Britain and the wealth that was extracted from the Caribbean, you cannot but think of economic reparations. You cannot but think of the ways in which that wealth that was extracted must be returned in some way, shape, or form. And of course, we're talking now in terms of the Brattle report that has charted, that has made the case for economic reparations. And I invite those who are not familiar with the Brattle report, just Google. The Brattle report will come up. There are trillions of dollars that have been calculated in terms of what is owed to the Caribbean and the Americas for slavery in the context of this reparatory justice movement. So we have a long way to travel. This is not going to happen overnight. And so collaboration becomes even more critical in terms of the ways in which we must work together. I really want to reiterate how important it is for everybody to get involved. The Center for Reparation Research stands ready to support those in communities who are wanting to have this conversation. Invite us. We will give talks. We want to be able to also be in conversation with those in the national reparation commissions across the region, because of course this is the arm of CARICOM that is already in the streets, so to speak. The CARICOM Reparations Commission is represented in each country by the national reparation committees. So we want to reach out. We want to touch everyone. We want to be able to to impact the conversation. And so the Center for Reparation Research, our email address, reparation.research@uwimona.edu.jm. Find us. We are on social media, our Instagram account or X account, formerly Twitter, crr.uwi or underscore, crr_uwi. We stand ready to be a part of the conversation with you, and also seeking your support as we move to increase our own advocacy and drive for education and research. Thank you.